Okay, I'm going to spend a little time in this video talking about Staples' article, Just Walk On By. And I think Staples does a very good job of explaining his idea that, from his perspective, that any time a black man leaves his home or enters into the public spaces, that his mere physical presence has the ability to alter that public space in ugly ways. It creates fear, it creates apprehension, it creates reactions by people in ways that other men's physical presence on the public streets do not. Now, this can play into the issue of the black rapist myth, where we've seen historically we have set up this idea that black men want white women, that they're out to get the white woman. And it is this idea of this threat to white womanhood, to the white woman, that was a way of constructing black men's gender and sexuality during slavery or post-slavery times in our history. So we see this idea that Staples is saying that his mere physical presence, even though he doesn't see himself as very threatening, other people see him as threatening when he enters a public space. Now, I want to bring in the idea that what I think has happened in our society today is that we no longer need the physical presence of the black man in order to have the public space altered. That all we need right now is the representation of the black male in order to alter the public spaces in the negative or ugly ways. And how I come to understand this took place when I was teaching at Bowling Green State University in Bowling Green, Ohio, just a few years ago. The dance clubs in Bowling Green the two most popular dance clubs instituted a ban on urban clothing. It created a lot of uproar among the students, and many students were saying that this was racist. And the owners of the bars or the dance clubs defended this action by saying it wasn't racist because nobody was allowed to wear urban clothing, the baggy pants, the long shirts, the hats. So because everybody was prohibited to wear this type of clothing, it wasn't racist. And in one sense, you can understand that argument. But then I started thinking, well, okay, it may not be racist, but it's influenced by racist ideology. And it's influenced by the idea that urban clothing has an association to violence that is related to black men, especially young black men. So it isn't the idea that the clothing itself, the fashion itself, was what they were objecting to, or the reason these bans were put in effect, is that they felt that people who wore this kind of clothing, especially young black males, were more prone to committing violence than, let's say, males who didn't wear this type of clothing. So it was the urban clothing's association to violence and that relationship to the black male, which I believe was at the heart of this ban. Now, I then started to understand that this is a type of racism in which if someone was to enter that club wearing a KKK hood, they would be able to get in because that type of clothing wasn't prohibited in the ban. Some wearing a neo-Nazi outfit could get in because that wasn't mentioned as being prohibited in the ban. And to take it to an extreme, somebody who wears a cowboy hat, cowboy shirt, blue jeans, and cowboy boots were allowed to get into the bar because it wasn't prohibited by the ban. Now, which type of clothing has a greater legacy and a greater association of violence? The recent edition or the recent fashion of urban clothing? Or does the KKK hood, the neo-Nazi uniform, and the cowboy outfit have a greater legacy to violence than urban clothing does. So I argue that they do. And I argue that this is where racism comes involved. And this is how this band was influenced by racist ideology. That it was racist because it identified blacks, it placed them within a group setting, but maintained an individualism to whites who have generally been the ones who wear the KKK, the neo-Nazis, and cowboy outfits. Those are not associated to group violence because the violence is associated to the white individual, not whites in general. Where the old urban clothing is associated to blacks in general, not just a particular black person. So we see in this way that it fell into this racist ideology of the black rapist myth in ways that created this band. And that we have a difference when it came to the ban because it didn't ban other types of clothing that's associated with violence. I finally understood it with one last example that took place with these dance clubs. When you take a look at the type of clothing that's associated with violence towards young people, especially young white people today, especially young white people in the suburbs today, what type of clothing is being worn by those people who have been the most violent? For example, what type of clothing do we associate with the two young men at Columbine? What type of clothing do we associate with the young men at Virginia Tech? The style that's called goth, G-O-T-H. Now we see that many of these type of mass killings or mass murders in the schools are the clothing that's associated with these people is the goth look. At these two dance clubs, while they banned urban clothing because it's a relationship to violence and that relationship to black males, and they didn't ban KKK outfits, neo-Nazi outfits, or cowboy outfits, went one step further. They each had a night that promoted wearing goth clothing. They had a goth night. So here you have a system that sets up where the clothing that's associated to black males is the one that's banned because of its relationship to violence. But the type of clothing that's related to white male violence, especially white male violence towards young people, that goth look, is not banned, but in fact promoted at these two dance clubs. So we see there then this example of staples altering the public space because physical presence is no longer needed. That all we need is the representation of the black male that we find in urban clothing to alter the public spaces. And we've done it in such a way that we will ban that type of clothing because of its relationship to violence, but we won't ban the type of clothing that has other relationships to violence, especially, in fact, we'll go one step further, that will promote an evening of wearing a certain type of clothing that has a relationship to violence. But that clothing is worn mainly by whites and not by people of color. So because whites are seen as individual and not given that group identity, they're allowed to get away with it. So this is what we see, this idea, and my argument is that with this ban on urban clothing, what we see is that we no longer need the physical presence of the black male to alter the public space. All we need now is the representation of that black male that's found in urban clothing in order to alter the public spaces in ugly ways. Thank you.